Hello, my name is Jamie Findley. I'm a lecturer in syntax in the Linguistics department here at Oxford, and I'm also one of the department's two outreach officers. As you'll hear in other talks, linguistics is something you can study alongside modern languages here at Oxford, either as an option within a straight modern languages degree, or as a joint school in modern languages and linguistics, which puts a bigger focus on the linguistics. Now, since linguistics is a subject which generally isn't taught at schools, some of you may have no idea what linguistics is at all. So instead of talking about the structure of the Oxford course in detail, what I want to do in the next few minutes is to give you some idea of what linguistics is and why it might be an interesting thing to study. Firstly, I should draw your attention to something quite impressive, perhaps even amazing, which is going on right now. I have been, and still am, exhaling air from my mouth while moving my tongue, lips, and other parts of my vocal tract to create sound waves in the air. And then, in this case through various other miracles of technology like microphones, speakers, and the internet, those sound waves have been causing thin membranes in your ears to vibrate, which sends electrical signals to your brains. And through this rather arcane mechanism, I have been sending thoughts from my brain to yours. And of course, this isn't restricted to speech either. Signed languages use a different medium, gesture and vision, rather than sound and hearing. And writing allows us to transmit our thoughts via marks or bumps on a surface. This sort of indirect telepathy is really a remarkable ability, and is what, perhaps more than anything else, distinguishes humans from other animals. Regardless of the occasional news item you might see, animals cannot talk. Some can mimic speech, some have quite complex systems of communication, but none of these systems is anywhere near as complex as human language. The ability to communicate complex thoughts and ideas is what has allowed human civilization to flourish. The biblical story of the Tower of Babel isn't just about the origins of different languages, it's a story about the power of language. When all the people of the world shared the same language, they were able to build a tower up to heaven. Language is not only what makes us human, it's also what makes being human so impressive in the first place. At the same time, though, being such an intrinsically human ability might make language seem rather unimpressive. After all, a 5-year-old can speak and understand almost as proficiently as a competent adult. So whatever linguistic knowledge we possess can't be all that intellectually challenging. Well, in fact, there are different kinds of knowledge, some superficial and obvious, some much deeper and unconscious. Even carrying out a simple conversation requires profound knowledge that most speakers are consciously unaware of. It's similar to an instinctive behavior like breathing. We say something is as easy as breathing because breathing requires no conscious knowledge. Yet, in order to breathe, we make use of complex neurophysiological control mechanisms, which biologists and neuroscientists have spent centuries unpicking. And on some level, we know how to do all of this, although we don't know consciously. So we can ask, what do we know when we know a language? And we can look at this on a number of levels. Let's work our way up from the smallest bits of language. Firstly, as a speaker of a language, you know its sound system. This means that you know naturally which sound combinations are acceptable and part of your language, and which ones are not. For example, which sounds can occur at the beginning of a word, and which ones can only occur at the end. In English, for instance, we have a velar nasal sound, also called engma, after the name of the letter used to represent it in the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is the sound at the end of the word sing, at least in my dialect. In fact, this sound can only occur at the end of a word in English, never at the beginning. So cling, song, rang are all words, but ngip or ngap are not. Now, if I asked you, or a 5-year-old, to invent a new English word, you might come up with all sorts of suggestions. But what's interesting is that you would not come up with any words beginning with a velar nasal. So you, and any English-speaking 5-year-old, know this fact about English, but you don't know that you know. As a speaker of a language, you also know about the internal structure of words. For example, you know that a word like reader is made up of 2 bits, what we might call the stem, read, and then the ending, which tells you that this is a noun that means someone or something that reads. And you can identify that very same structure in words like lender, borrower, singer, cleaner, painter, baker, and so on. But then you get to burger. Does it mean someone or something that burgs? Clearly not. So the structure of this word is different, and you know this, but you don't consciously know that you know. Another thing that you know is that particular strings of sounds signify certain concepts or meanings. So you know, as a speaker of English, what box means, and that it identifies something different from fox. You also know that while box and fox are words of the English language, zox is not. That is, it's a sequence of sounds that's not related to a specific meaning. And there's something quite important here. When you don't know a language, the words and sentences of that language are incomprehensible. The reason is that the relationship between speech sounds and the meanings they represent is almost entirely an arbitrary one. For instance, the English word fox does not in any way naturally map onto the animal it stands for. It doesn't physically resemble it, for example. It's entirely a matter of convention that fox refers to a fox, and indeed, in other languages, different sequences of sounds are used to refer to foxes. You know, for your own language, thousands upon thousands of these arbitrary connections between sound patterns and meanings, all of which you've had to memorize. Again, you know, but you don't consciously know that you know. The last thing I'll mention is that any speaker of a language knows how to combine words into phrases and phrases into sentences. Knowing a language means being able to produce new sentences never spoken before, and to understand sentences never heard before. Think of a child learning language. They don't just learn the sentences they hear and then reproduce those. If we all did that, we would never be able to say anything new, and that civilization building power I mentioned earlier would hardly have got off the ground. Indeed, this power of creativity is one of the key differences between human language and animal communication systems. No, children must not only hear and learn sentences, but also know, unconsciously, how to break those sentences down into parts, and how to uncover the rules which enable new sentences to be created from those parts. Apart from anything else, it's impossible to simply memorize the infinite number of sentences which are possible in English or any other natural language, because our brains are finite things. So, when we learn a language, we must learn something finite. And what we learn is a finite list of building blocks, sounds, words, word parts, and some rules for combining them. But crucially, these are not the sort of rules which are consciously decided or taught in school or elsewhere. We don't specifically teach children to talk at all. They just pick it up. These are unconscious rules that we acquire as very young children as we develop language. And these rules are actually very complex. Part of the job of a linguist is to discover them, to make the unconscious conscious. And we'd be out of a job if the task only required the intellectual prowess of a 5-year-old. But linguistics is also a very broad church. There are a huge number of points of contact with other disciplines. Studying linguistics alongside a language can really help you to broaden the scope of your degree. It also enables you to develop a number of important analytical and data-focused skills, and to look at the language you're studying from a new perspective. So for anyone who's interested in how language works, perhaps more so than in the particular uses it gets put to, I would strongly encourage you to think about studying linguistics.